Get ready to take a flamethrower to the official narrative and learn what the elites don't want you to know. You're listening to The Tom Woods Show.
Hey everybody, Tom Woods here. It's episode 2615 of The Tom Woods Show. We got Dave Smith here, host of Part of the Problem, stand-up comedian I just saw in Houston. We'll get to that at some point in our conversation. He's a guest on every show you've ever heard of. And Dave, I actually want to take a little time at some point, maybe right away, to talk about your recent debate at Princeton. We got Scott Horton debating over at Dartmouth. What kind of world is this? This isn't the world we inhabited 10 years ago.
That's for sure. It's there's a small comment on, I guess, me and Scott rising in prominence, but the much larger comment is just on how far our civilization has fallen that we are in these positions. Not Scott, but me is just ridiculous.
Well, I will say the Ivy Leagues have seen better days, but I don't think that's the explanation for what's going on here. In fact, if you don't mind, let's actually start with that, even though I know it was, what was it, like 2 weeks ago or something?
Something like that, yeah.
Something like that. And I know you've already covered it, but I don't think it can be covered quite enough. Not only because of the subject matter, but also because I guess it was in the Oxford style, in the sense that there was a before and after. But usually an Oxford style debate, you know, the audience, 8% of the audience changes its mind. And yours was like, it's not possible in an Oxford style debate to change that many minds in such a short time. And somehow you did it. So, well, first of all, what was the topic?
Oh, it was it was an Israel debate, but what I liked about it is the resolution was specifically about it. Like, it was, I forget the exact wording, but it was like the U.S.-Israel relationship is good for the United States of America. So that it was a very specific kind of America first, take on the U.S.-Israeli relationship. Not just what I've done a million of, it feels like at this point, is just a Israel-Palestine debate. So that was kind of interesting, and I enjoyed that aspect.
And you were debating against Josh Hammer, and so was he. I think I've had him on the Tom Woods Show, actually.
Oh, have you? Yeah, he's I believe he's a senior editor at Newsweek, and he's kind of like I don't want to like describe it the wrong way, but like a nationalist kind of new right type who would not describe himself as like a neoconservative, more on the kind of Trump populist side of things, but from my perspective, kind of pushing the same old neoconservative stuff.
Right.
But yes, some type of like right winger. I don't know exactly how he'd describe himself.
So I was just checking. About a year and a half ago, I had him on. We talked about DEI. And he's perfectly good on that.
And I'm sure he's great on DEI. He's probably good on a lot of the things that you would expect that type to be good on.
In order to find this, I went to tomwoods.com and on the search bar, I typed in Hammer. And so his episode came up. But what also came up is a blog post from 2020. And I would love to reread whatever this is, because the subject line, the title of it is Public Health Official Hammered. I'd love to know what that means. Drunk? Was he hammered by arguments? I don't know. I'll have to look at that later. Anyway, let's keep talking to Dave here. So what's the audience like? Is it students? Is it people from outside the university? Is it professors?
It seemed to me to be a mix of all. So there were a few different groups of students there. There were some professors there, and then there were a few people who just like were podcast fans of mine who were there, and I think some people who were fans of Josh. So it was kind of a mix. I stayed and met people after the event, and I met like a bunch of students who just were Princeton students who I guess had heard about the debate happening. So it was cool. It was kind of interesting. Going into it, I had no idea what to expect. It's not, Princeton, I think it wasn't like Columbia where there were like these huge protests over the last year. It was kind of different. They're a little bit more tame over there. But so I had no idea like whether the audience was going to be on my side, on his side, or what ended up happening in the pre-poll was it was a mixed bag, really, with a lot of undecideds, which was good. It ended up being really good.
Yeah, that's actually, I think, where you want people to be, because if it's everybody's hardcore one way or the other, then no minds change, and then that's the end. So that actually does work out. So you were saying in a commentary about this that you were surprised that he didn't really have all that much of an argument. So what would, if you were to steel man what he did say, what would be the best rendition of his side?
It was essentially the relationship is in America's interest because we're always going to have an interest in the Middle East. And now we have a strong ally right there in the middle of the Middle East. That Israel, there's really no moral consideration about Israel's war because they're fighting a very moral war, and the civilian to militant death rate is about 1-to-1. And so, yeah, why wouldn't we be friends with a country that, shares intelligence with us? They're killing our enemies. So there's, hey, look at all these bad guys they're taking out in Lebanon and in Gaza and in, I guess, Syria, wherever. And so, yeah, why wouldn't we be on the side of people who are killing radical Muslims and share intelligence with us? I think that was about it. I don't really know. I mean, I'm trying my best. I really don't know how much more to steelman it other than that.
Okay. All right. So if that's the argument, then is your claim against it? Now, I mean, I did listen to it, but that some of these enemies are our enemies precisely because of the relationship with Israel.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, well, look, I mean, I essentially my argument was that if you're going to say this relationship is in our national interest, then just like everything and every relationship in life, there are always costs and benefits. I mean, like that's true with everything. It's true with your wife, with my wife, you know what I mean? Like there's always, we says that the trade-offs are really worth it. And I think my wife brings a lot more value to my life. And I'm sure you feel the same way. But it's not as if they're, you're sacrificing a certain degree of freedom. You're taking on a certain degree of responsibility, like even just in a marriage, this is always true. And so I was like, okay, well, let's look at what the costs of the relationship with Israel are. And the fact that they've been, using their substantial influence to push all of the terror wars, and it costs all this money. And then I also made the point that, as you just alluded to, that like another cost of this relationship is that we end up creating more enemies and taking on all of the hatred that is Israel's now becomes ours. And I just don't see how anyone could argue against that. He tried to, and again, I'm not trying to be like mean, but I just think he very unsuccessfully attempted to argue that none of that's really true.
Do you remember more or less what the numbers were before and after?
Nah, I'd have to double check that. But as you said, it was a pretty substantial, I think I took from every category. Like essentially all the undecideds broke for me. Some people who were on the negative also broke for me, and that or the positive. I can't remember which one I was, but it was pretty big. That's all I remember.
As I recall, it was between a 25 and 30 point jump for you. Like you were like 40
like
something, and you ended up 70 something. It was unbelievable. I mean, when they were set to release the numbers, were you a little nervous, or did you feel like I got this thing in the bag?
I wasn't. You never know.
You never know, right?
How people are going to vote. I felt like by the end of the debate, I was like, come on. I mean, that was a pretty, I've done a lot of debates at this point, and when you're like, okay, this was kind of a close one, or when it's pretty one-sided like that, it was like, yeah, I don't know. I mean, he just didn't really land any blows on me. And the one that he tried to, which I probably could have handled a little bit better, but if you saw, there was this one point where he asked me who I trust more, Osama bin Laden or Benjamin Netanyahu, and I was like, what? Like, I don't trust either of them. And he was like, well, I think that says something. I think that says something right there. But then never made the argument of like what that says or what. And I just thought it was such a kind of transparently bad faith tactic that I was like, I think that really actually hurt him. And then aside from that, there wasn't really anything. He didn't really land a single blow. He tried a couple times, like he tried to point out a few things, but I think the problem is just like, I've done my homework. So I knew what he was saying, like he'd bring up like the Barbary Wars or something like that. And then I knew about them. And so then I would, talk about them and then bring up something else and point out why that makes no sense. At one point he said, because I was talking about how Benjamin Netanyahu, was testified in 2002, a congressional hearing, urging America to overthrow Saddam. And he was like, yeah, but Benjamin Netanyahu wasn't even the prime minister. And Sharon opposed the war in Iraq. And then I was like, yeah, but that's not true. And I know it's like, no, Sharon's envoy got concerned in 2002 when George W. Bush was talking about invading Iraq because he wanted him to overthrow Iran first. And then when they got assurances that Iran was going to be overthrown next, he totally backed off and was like, okay, great. Then we have no problem here. And then the Sharon government started churning out some of the most egregious Iraq war propaganda. So it just wasn't true. And then after I said that, he just had no response. He just kind of had no response back to that. So it was like, he just had a lot of moments like that where his arguments just did not land. And so anyway, when we went into the final voting, I was, you never know, but I was feeling pretty good about the thing. So I wasn't like surprised by the results.
If you're tired of the Fed being in control of your finances, Monetary Metals is revolutionizing how you can grow your wealth outside the system and gain greater control of your finances by growing your gold in ounces every single month. With Monetary Metals' gold leasing program, clients can earn 3% annual interest on their gold, paid every single month in more ounces of physical gold. Gold prices broke all-time highs in 2024, and now you can get your gold to work for you, generating additional interest income every month. The interest you earn is paid in ounces of physical gold or silver, which you get in addition to any price appreciation from gold and silver during the year. Join thousands of investors who are already earning interest income every month paid in gold and silver. All Woods here is one of them. This is a no-brainer for gold owners. Now is the time to secure your wealth and build your legacy in an asset that the government can't inflate away. The Fed can print dollars, they can't print gold. Now's the time for you to start growing your wealth in ounces. Go to monetary-metals.com/woods to learn more. That's monetary-metals.com/woods. But this is quite interesting. I mean, again, going to Princeton and engaging in a debate is, for our side, which is normally, not so normally anymore, but as you well recall, for a long time, with the exception of Ron Paul and the occasional exception of Pat Buchanan, it was as if people like you and me just didn't exist. People who had our opinions just didn't exist. We're not part of the conversation. It's going to be Newt Gingrich to Hillary. That's the range.
Yep.
And we've just blasted through that to the point where, Scott Horton is doing a one-on-one debate, with Wesley Clark, Supreme Commander of NATO, for heaven's sake.
It's unbelievable.
I don't know how that happened. I actually don't know how it happened, but it happened.
Well, one of the things that's so beautiful about it, and it almost does feel like, I don't want to be, I don't know, it just feels like almost like the fingerprints of the Almighty or something like this. It's like, what's so crazy is that this thing cracked, and it was like the market that allowed libertarians to have a seat at the table. Ultimately, it was just the fact that we kind of just outcompeted them. I was just the other day, I was talking about this on my show, but when Joy Reid just got fired from MSNBC, and they were saying in the demo, as they call it, whatever it is, like 18 to 45 or whatever the demo that advertisers really care about, she was doing she was doing like 40,000 a show. Like these people with the billions of dollars behind them and all of this infrastructure just like completely have lost in the market. And, I think, look, doing the debate at Princeton, particularly just for me personally, was a kind of surreal thing. It's like, I'm a college dropout, now I'm in an Ivy League school. First off, it did a lot to prove the college model useless. I couldn't help but think that. You got these kids at an Ivy League school sitting there listening to me, and then I'm dominating this other guy who I'm sure went to some, nice school or something like that. And it's just like so that was kind of surreal. But, I think, like I always kind of say, it really is, it was just one of those things where the reason why I'm able to go and do all these things and do well in these debates is just because I'm on the right side of the issue. And like it's the whole thing, like libertarians just make really good points because they got a lot of good stuff to say. And, sometimes there are these policies where it's almost, like I was arguing on Piers Morgan the other day with somebody who's, we were talking about Ukraine, and they're arguing about how, like, if we let Putin have a win here, he's trying to reconstitute the Soviet Union, the whole talking point. He's going to move on NATO next. And then like 2 sentences later, he's talking about how Ukraine is winning and Putin is being destroyed and they can't even take Ukraine. And then I'm like, wait, but isn't there an obvious contradiction there? Like, which one is it? Is he can't even deal with Ukraine, or is it that he's about to take Poland? You know what I mean? Like, which one is? And you just realize, like, okay, in the official talking points, the official narrative has this huge hole in it. It's like we need to protect the vaccinated from the unvaccinated. You know what I mean? Like, you just look at it for a second and you're like, well, the logic of this falls apart. And I think the same, trying to be America first, pro-Israel, is just, there's so many holes in that thing. And so it's weird in a way, because I always, for many, many years, I always felt like, oh, the libertarian arguments are just so much better than these establishment arguments. But now it's like we actually get a chance to really demonstrate that, because you get to go up against these guys. And for the most part, they just don't really have anything.
Yeah. And of course, they give the impression that, they're the experts, and that's why they wouldn't deal with people like you and me, and because they're respectable and we're not, and all that. But that also means that they are not prepared. They're not ready to deal with they're not ready to deal with a Dave Smith or a Scott Horton or any of our people. I want to switch gears entirely here, because I want to ask you about where do you think the transgender issue is going to go? Now, shortly after the election, Michael Malice predicted that Democrats would start tiptoeing away from it because it was such an obvious loser. And we did see on Twitter or X some people starting to remove their pronouns from their bios, which was interesting. But on the other hand, we still see on the state level, they're still going to die on the hill of boys and girls sports. And frankly, the young generation has had it drilled into their heads that it's perfectly normal for people to state their pronouns and for new pronouns to appear suddenly. So they may well have imbibed the idea that this is just part of life, and it would be odd for them. They would consider it odd to be told that, no, this actually isn't a thing. Like, you were just misled entirely. So I could see it going either way.
Yeah, well, I think what we're seeing is kind of both of these things happen. Like, it's all happening together. I mean, some people are walking away from it. There definitely has been a realization by the progressive establishment that this stuff is deeply unpopular and does not help with winning elections. So to that extent, I think there are some people that are trying their best to walk away from it. The problem is that it really is like a cult kind of rose up over the last decade, and there are true believers all over the place. And it's going to be very difficult to completely undo that. And so I don't know. I do think that democracy has become like a pesky thing for Democrats that it's really unbelievable. Whatever. There's a lot of interesting kind of talk about democracy in the libertarian world. Obviously, famously, Hans Hermann Hoppe, who's probably the most brilliant living libertarian thinker, has written a book on the subject, and he makes some very compelling arguments. But then there were, people like Mises who made very pro-democracy arguments. Even leaving any of that aside, and I'm not even really sure exactly where I fall on that, but leaving any of that aside, the fact is that the Democrats have now, they rigged the primary in 2016. They rigged the primary in 2020. They canceled the primary in 2024, and then ultimately went with a candidate who had never received any votes or anything, And so it's just like they clearly kind of have recognized like, okay, we're having trouble winning, like a real contest of who people support. And so I think in a sense, all bets are off when that's the case, because look, as we all know, none of these Democrats have any ideology whatsoever. They're power brokers. They don't really believe, like, none of them really believe that boys can become girls or anything like that. It was just a useful tool. If the usefulness is run out, then okay, it's quite possible they're going to walk away from that. But again, like you said, if you're talking about campus activists or state level politicians, they're not in on that game. They're not in on this power broker game. You know what I mean? So I think there probably will be people who go down with this mental illness, and I think that's just going to be part of the equation of America moving forward. Luckily, I think it's a minority of people, and so we can kind of deal with it.
I think that's more or less my thought, but it definitely, the wind is coming out of the sails here. But yet we're still hearing this crazy language. Like there was a state representative. Now, do you remember offhand what state it was that this recently came up in?
I'm not sure.
I can't remember which state it was, but there's a state rep there who used the word genocide again. So they're back to the trans genocide again as an expression to describe the kind of atmosphere that's created when you go after, protecting girls in girls' sports. This is part of the overall trans genocide. Now that's just, you got to just not talk like that, because anybody looking around can see there's obviously no trans genocide going on. So you just sound like a hysterical lunatic.
Well, I mean, look, how can you not? I mean, look, at the core of the belief, you're a hysterical lunatic. The whole thing is just so ridiculous. And I mean, this is like, and it's interesting now because it really is, like me and you, Tom, we're always, and I guess it's because the camp we come from, right? Like we love that Harry Brown wrote that piece on September 12th. And we love that Ron Paul stood up in the middle of the Iraq war and told the truth. And we love that Tom Woods in the middle of lockdowns was like railing against lockdowns. And so sometimes we have this tendency to, like, when there's a political storm, when something's really the third rail of politics, you walk right up to it and you deal with it then. And it's interesting when the mood kind of changes, and now it's totally okay to say these things. Like there's just, if I say right now that, like, a lot of people got vaccine injured by the COVID vaccine, or if I say it's not even a vaccine, there's no energy behind that. It's not like, whoa, Dave just said something on the Tom Woods show. I'm not like, hey, dude, you might have to take this episode off YouTube. Like, we may not be able to, it's fine. There's no problem. But a couple years ago, you said that was a real crazy thing to say. And so I remember, being in these arguments, as you were too, with like other libertarians and stuff in like 2017, 2018, when it was a storm. Like if you said something, but even at the time, I remember all of it to be, guys, this is nuts. This is just freaking insane. They're telling me we have an epidemic of little 8-year-old boys who are actually girls that are stuck in boys' bodies, and we have to, as a society, turn them into girls? Like, what are you talking about? What evidence is there that this is even a real phenomenon? Oh, right. Zero. There's zero. So once you're there, why not say also they're being genocided? The pretend little boys are also being genocided. I don't know. But it is, as people get more comfortable calling this stuff out for the insanity that it is, it does, it's a little bit easier for everybody to see what I think a lot of us saw all along, which is that this is a truly like a form of mass psychosis. This is just, it's pure madness just took over. And whatever, I'm at least grateful that it does, as you said, the air seems to be coming out of the sails, and there seems to be, at least to some degree, amongst the American people, like a yearning for normalcy of some sort. And that is just very nice to see, because there's like been a war on normal, it seems like, for the last 10, 15 years. And that is just that's not good for anyone.
Hey everybody, let your old friend Woods here save you a bundle. I'd like to tell you about my friends at Federated Computer, who are changing the way businesses buy software. We all need software to run our business, but the best business software doesn't have to cost thousands of dollars each month. The typical Federated Computer customer saves 75% or more on their software bill, gets great software, top-notch customer service and support, and a software solution that is uniquely installed for your business and without any surveillance or breaches of privacy. For example, if you use Google for email, Salesforce for CRM, Slack for team chat, ListMonkey for customer communications, and Airtable for data management, with a team of 10, you'd save $9,000 per year on software costs switching to Federated Computer. And what is wild, the cost of Federated Computer doesn't grow as your team grows. You can use your Federated Computer savings to grow your business rather than feed the woke Silicon Valley software companies. The Federated Computer team invented computing in the cloud. Now they're taking a hammer to the ridiculously high prices of business software and have many, many satisfied customers to prove they deliver. Federated Computer has been a longtime supporter of the Tom Woods Show, and they're offering 30% off their already low prices when you use coupon code WOODS. Go to www.federated.computer to begin to save 75% or more on your monthly software costs. That's www.federated.computer. These folks are going to do you a big, big favor. Check them out. Yeah, and people are tired of being hectored, and and no matter what concession they make, it's never enough, and they're still bad people and haters. And, go jump in a lake. I mean, you look at the vast sweep of world history and the kinds of things people have had to endure. Whatever is going on with transgender people is not even one grain of sand on the beach compared to what the vast bulk of mankind has had to endure. So, and by the way, this reminds me, so I was in Houston about a week and a half ago because the next day we were going on the Tom Woods cruise. And so I thought, I found out that Dave Smith is performing in Houston this very night. So why don't we show up? And I didn't tell you I was coming. I showed up and surprised you. And I was really trying to wait till the show to tell you I was there. But I didn't bring a coat with me because I thought, that's Texas. Isn't it warm there? I didn't bring a coat. So we're outside waiting in line because the first show is still going on. We're waiting for that to let out. And I'm in line. I am freezing my you-know-what off. So I texted you and said, you better be damn funny because this is like painful. But anyway, there was a guy who before you and Rob went, it's the first guy, then Rob, and then you. So this first guy is kind of like the host who introduces the comedians on the bill. And, once Rob came on and once you came on, it was instantly obvious why you're the headliner. Because you're at this point, I've been seeing you for a while do comedy, but it's like every time I see you, I think, well, he's hit a ceiling. I don't see how he could get better than this. And every time you smash through it.
No, well, thank you. That's very kind of you to say. Those were fun shows down there in Houston. But yeah, I think I brought New Jersey weather with me. It was brutal.
Jeez,
it was like in the 30s in Texas.
Yeah, this was not supposed to happen. So what I want to ask you about is, obviously a lot of the people there were part of the problem fans. They knew what they were getting with the Dave Smith Show. But you got to figure some people just go to the local comedy club because they want to kick back and hear some comedy, and they don't research who the comedian is. So, you got to get a handful of people who don't know what to expect. And I wonder, given how edgy some of your comedy is, have you ever run into people causing a problem at the show?
Oh yeah. I've sure. And that's about right. These days it's usually like, depending on the market, depending on the club, it's usually about 80-20, 90-10 people there to see me. And so that just gives you an inherent advantage over anyone. Like if somebody is offended or doesn't like my style of comedy, because you're just so in the minority already. So it's like, you know what I mean? It's but yeah, I've had that happen before. He says all types of things. It's one of the great things about doing stand-up. But you're in a nightclub and the people are right there. So it's a very raw environment. You get people who are drunk. I've had that happen plenty of times, just hammered people get offended, but it's not like, these days, I don't do too much stand-up in New York City anymore. I live an hour outside of the city. I got 2 little kids. I'm very busy with work. There's just not that much time to go in and just do sets at the comedy clubs in New York. But that's how I started. And I came up there doing stand-up, for, I don't know, from 2006 to 2020. I was in New York City doing stand-up every single night. And around Trump won, like around 2016, with the rise of wokeism, and back then I was performing for not my crowd at all, like 100% just people who came out to a comedy club tonight. And that's when it started getting interesting, where I'd get a lot of like, woke people being offended over the word you use, getting up, walking out, sending emails, I'll never come back here again. But I've always, like I've said this to you before, it's with like comedy and being funny is its own force. It's outside of politics or it's outside of arguments. It's a whole different thing. Somebody could make a joke about something that you completely disagree with the point of it, but you could be dying laughing because it's just really funny. Jim Jeffries had this great bit about being pro-gun control. It's like a great bit. And the whole point of the bit was he was against people having guns, but it was just really funny. And so even if you're like a complete Second Amendment guy, you could just enjoy. So anyway, the point is, no matter how much people ever get offended, it's like, the thing is like, as long as you're being funny and like your thing is really funny, that's the best like battle plan to get you through it. And so that's always my attitude. It's just like, hey, if I think this is hilarious, I'm going to say it. I don't, then you guys can have whatever reaction you want to.
We brought a friend, Paul Counts, who, he sees the world the way we do, but he's not primarily a political guy. He's my business partner. And we were in town because he was coming on the cruise, and I wasn't just going to leave him hanging around at the hotel. Why don't you come along to the Dave Smith Show? And I also thought it'd be interesting for a guy who's never heard you do comedy. He's never heard Part of the Problem. He is just a guy. And it was painful, physically painful, because of how much he was laughing for him. I mean, it was incredible. So, I wouldn't describe him as a normie exactly, but completely new to Dave Smith, and he's 100% convert. Like when we got to see you backstage, he was like starstruck and had to get a picture with you and all that just from that one night.
Well, it was very nice to meet him, and I love that. That's just like that warms my heart to hear. I don't know. I've always thought I really fell in love with the art of stand-up comedy. And I've never fallen out of love with it. There's something about it that I just think is so beautiful. And there's just something really positive about just making people laugh. And like, how much fun is it when you just like dying laughing? Like you get together with an old friend and you're having a conversation and you guys are just like reminiscing and you're holding your sides because you're laughing so hard about some old story. It's just the best. And it's just so cool. It's like a cool thing to just be able to give to people. So I love hearing that.
Well, it seems like you get into kind of a groove where everything's just going your way. Like you can do no wrong. And like once you recognize within the first few minutes that you have a decent crowd, you know that you've got the material to keep them happy. But I remember at the end talking to you about this, and because you have so much experience in this area, you were able to analyze the venue on a level that we normies couldn't. So for instance, you were saying that one of the problems with this venue is that the ceilings are too high. And you were explaining why that mattered. And we walked away thinking, man, this guy really knows his craft. If he would critique the venue on something like that would never occur to any of us.
Yeah, well, I mean, a lot of that's just, I'm going on 20 years, I've just been doing this for a long time. So, like I remember, you were talking about this many years ago, but where you were giving advice about like, there are people who are like, oh, I want to start a podcast, or, oh, I want to start this business, or, oh, I want to do this. And you were like, well, you got to just get started. You got to get started. You got to start doing it. Like this is always, and it's just true in life in general. It's like, well, get moving, like even if somebody is, if somebody's like 100 pounds overweight or something like that, and they're like, I got to work out this entire thing. It's like, go for a walk. Just get moving. You know what I mean? Like do the first step. And there's just, when you do something, you just start figuring it out. And so I've just been doing this for a long time. So yeah, little things like that are just, without even thinking about it, you just pick them all up. It's like, oh yeah, you have a very high ceiling. The laughter, the noise all kind of goes up. It doesn't like, low ceilings, it just, the laughter hits you right in the face. And so there's little things like that are just, you know, after doing it for a while, you pick it up. You do enough different rooms and you realize like, okay, here's the good thing about this room. Here's the nice thing about that one. You know, and so, yeah, high ceilings are an enemy of stand-up comedy.
One other thing, I know we've all talked about it already, but I'm probably going to talk about this in all my episodes this week, at least briefly. The thing with Ukraine and Zelensky and Trump and J.D. Vance. I mean, I don't think there's anything wrong with my talking about it more than once, because I think we've just witnessed something that is unique in certainly recent U.S. history, and more important than the public falling out is that we saw in real time a policy be implemented that was the opposite of what the permanent foreign policy establishment wanted. That never, ever happens. And we watched it unfold on TV or in clips on Twitter or whatever. And again, I know it's already been talked about, but I that's a strange new phenomenon that we are absolutely not accustomed to. And secondly, you know as well as I do, there is a wing of the libertarian movement that a lot of them are Eastern European, but not all, but they tend to be the cosmopolitan types, and they've all got the Ukraine flags. And when push comes to shove, they scold you because you have some narrative different from the CIA's. And they are just absolutely beside themselves at this. And so I posted on so-called X. I tweeted the thing out and I said, "You're damn right I voted for this. This is what I voted for. Absolutely."
Well, I mean, to take the beginning of that, I mean, I think it's appropriate to talk about this every day this week. I mean, I just did a whole episode on it, and I'm going to do another episode. I got Scott coming on today, and so this is unlike anything I've ever seen, and it was an incredible moment on many different levels. Obviously, the one you hit on is probably the most important in terms of policy. That Trump actually turned around and suspended all weapon sales to Ukraine, starting immediately, starting with the ones that were already allocated, that were on their way there. So that is a huge freaking deal. And of course, you know, the worst thing that you could possibly do in Washington, D.C. is end a war. And so he's going to come under a lot of heat for that. But I was really blown away by Zelensky. And this has got to be the biggest strategic blunder that I've ever seen. I mean, there's just not the guy was in a position where he was totally dependent on Donald Trump, down to the point that like his own life might be dependent on Donald Trump. And he comes in there and his strategy was to try to alpha Trump on national television in a language he barely speaks. And I really was, I know there are people like in the corporate media and probably those goofy libertarians you mentioned who are trying to spin this as like Donald Trump was so horrible to this guy or something like that. But I don't know. I was just blown away by I thought Zelensky was just so out of line. And like I think something that was like as he's sitting there arguing with these guys and he's saying we can't negotiate with Putin without security guarantees. And you're like, wait, what? You're just demanding we also have to forever guarantee the security of Ukraine as if that's something you're entitled to? Like, what? And I got to say, Tom, and I am really not, I'm really not a very conservative person. I'm a right winger, but I'm like a right wing liberal, like Murray Rothbard. Like I'm a right wing hippie, like Ayn Rand used to say about us. But I'm not the person who, there's people I really, really respect, right? Like say Pat Buchanan or someone like that, who's like a true conservative. And do you remember he would like get really upset when there'd be like a photo of Obama taken and he had like his jacket off in the Oval Office and he would just be like in a shirt and tie. And Pat Buchanan would be like, this is disrespectful to America, and like, I just, that's not me. I'm not that guy. I'm not a suit and tie guy. Tom, me and you have been good friends for many years at this point. I think you've probably seen me in a tie twice. And one of them was at your wedding.
Guests on the Tom Woods Show range from Fetterman to Zelensky, pretty much.
Yes, that's right. That's right. Well, literally at your wedding, I wore a tie. I wore a tux. Yep. It seemed like the right thing to do. Seemed like it would have been disrespectful to show up in a hoodie. And
well, you
when
were
I was
in the wedding
introducing,
party and everyone else was wearing it. You really had no choice there.
I was pretty much forced into it there. When I was at the Reno convention, when I wore a shirt and tie because I was introducing Ron Paul, and I was like, I just can't.
Yeah.
I have to put on a tie to introduce Ron Paul. So, but I'm just saying, aside from that, you'll never see me in a suit and tie. But if I got invited to the Oval Office, I would put on a suit because that just seems like the right thing to do. And like, Joe Rogan on the last time I was on there, he floated out the idea. He said, we got to do a podcast with us two and Trump. And I don't know if that's ever going to happen, but probably not. But like, if it did happen, and I certainly wouldn't hold back from a lot of criticisms I have of Donald Trump, but I would refer to him as Mr. President. I would never sit there on the show and be like, Donald, it's like this, because that would just seem like wildly disrespectful. And in the same sense that like I'm not Catholic, but if I meet a Catholic priest, I'll refer to him as father, because that just seems like, this is something that is very important to a lot of people. And so you should be respectful of that. And so anyway, even me, and I hang out with comedians, but even me, I was like, this guy is coming. He is coming to the Oval Office dressed like that, and he's referring to the vice president as JD as he's like interrupting him and lecturing him. I was like blown away by the level of disrespect. And for a country that's our fat welfare mom in Eastern Europe, like, show some damn respect before you come here and demand that we give you security assurances in addition to the hundreds of billions of dollars in aid that we've given you. So anyway, the best part of all of it, to me, seems to be that maybe this took Donald Trump out of this dumb mineral deal plan. Because this is, as you know, Tom, right? Like Donald Trump, look, I don't regret voting for the guy either. I am blown away by the positives that we're getting. I've never seen it. There's never been anything like that. From a libertarian perspective, we are, for the first time at least in my 41 years, we actually have some positive things coming out of the White House. And this is incredible. But it's still Donald Trump. And he's still, everything that he's good on it because he's got a gut instinct that tells him that, So we're occupying Afghanistan for 20 years and it's costing us trillions and we get nothing. That's bad business, but that's where it comes from. It never comes from like a philosophical understanding of anything. It never comes from like deep thought and a deep understanding of an issue because you've read 15 books on the subject. And so the problem is that he's very susceptible to, you go like, okay, this war is bad for business. And then if someone goes, well, what if we take all the oil? You go, okay, now we're talking, And so you could see right where he oscillated back and forth during the whole campaign between we should end the war in Ukraine and negotiate a peace to, or maybe Europe steps up and pays for it. Like that would also be okay with Donald Trump. And so this mineral deal almost seemed like a thing where he was like, well, hey, now we get something out of it. We get a return on our investment. And now Ukraine gets something out of it. But really what he was selling it as was almost like a de facto security guarantee. Like he was almost saying like, well, look, if we're involved here, if we have business here, then we're going to have a real problem with Vladimir Putin messing up our business. But like, as you know, Tom, that the whole point is that we don't want to be doing that. That's the whole this is what the whole war started over, was us constantly floating out the idea that we were going to incorporate Ukraine into our military alliance. And so why would we even want to do that? And now that he's said like, well, I can't do business with this guy, it's like, great, we don't need any of that. In fact, we don't need Zelensky involved in the negotiations at all. This can be negotiated between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin. And then Zelensky will just have to accept whatever is handed to him. That, so I think the best part of all of this is that it probably nudged Donald Trump in that direction rather than, and Ukraine doesn't even have that many rare minerals. Like we don't need them. None of this is beneficial to America. So like, that would be great if this just pushed him in the direction of like, just wipe our hands of this. It is so, I mean, man, like obviously I've been talking about this for so many years now. And Scott Horton just wrote this, masterpiece on the whole history of the conflict. And so it's something like in our circles that we bring up a lot, but like, it's almost, like as I go on Piers Morgan and shows like that, and I'm arguing with regular, people outside of our world, And you're like, the policy is just so insane. Like it's maddening when you think about the fact, and this is like, you know a lot about this history, Tom. In fact, I learned a lot about this from you when I first became a libertarian. But like, when it was the Soviet Union, when it actually was the Red Menace, okay? And even back then, we drew the line at the Elbe River. And we're like, okay, even for the Soviet Union.
Yeah, and even
like, well, listen,
back then, we even talked to them.
Yes, but even then we went, well, look, we can't protect Estonia and Poland and like, oh, like that's just ridiculous. And this is when we were dealing with the Soviet Union. We only said we'll protect, and now there is no Soviet Union. They've been gone for 30 years, and we're talking about the Donbass region. Like, this is just so freaking insane. We're talking about Luhansk. That's what we're talking about, giving security guarantees to. It's like there's not like a shred of realism in the foreign policy at all anymore. That even, and by the way, I encourage you, go back and read Murray Rothbard, because the whole Cold War was stupid too. Like, I'm not even defending any of that, but at least there was like a shred of attachment to reality. And so anyway, it's just anything that moves us away from this insane foreign policy is just a godsend.
Well, last thing, I can't believe that they've basically stuck to this despite the absolutely predictable wave of juvenile name calling, like oh, he's in Putin's pocket, and he's a left, and he's this, that, and the other thing, and they're just ignoring that. They're just ignoring it and just going on, which is shocking, because that's the kind of thing that makes people turn around and apologize and explain themselves and this and that and the other thing. And it doesn't seem to be working on him at this point. Does not seem to be working. And of course, we all know how dumb that argument is, because I'm sure not going to war in Iraq was like, as we would say, a Saddam talking point.
Yeah, yeah.
Who cares? Is it true or is it false? I mean, this is so, really, it's like a second grade argument.
Yeah, I know. And I hear it all the time. And it's like, right. Like you said, I mean, literally for even a second grader, I think. Like, I feel like if my kid was in the second grade and made that argument, I'd be like, wait, hold on. But you should know better. Like, think about this. Because no matter what position you take on anything, you're on the side of some bad people. Like, if you don't like the Nazis, that's kind of like Stalin. And if you don't like Stalin, that's kind of like Hitler. What? Like, it's just, none of this just makes sense at all. But one of the things that's really beautiful about the moment that we're living through, and a huge part of it's just, they just overplayed their hand. And they went to this well so many times and in such absurd ways that it just doesn't seem to be effective anymore. And that is kind of like, I think, one of the broader themes of this moment in America, where it's like this stuff just isn't working anymore. There's this speech that Murray Rothbard gave that it's on YouTube. I don't remember the title of it, but I bet you'll remember it as I start describing it. But it's one of the later Rothbard speeches. It's right after the fall of the Soviet Union, so 91,
is
92.
It a strategy for the right?
I would know it if I saw it right away. That might be it.
I'm almost certain. It's one of my favorite things he ever wrote, even though it's not like academic or anything. But the fact that it's not academic, and yet in a casual setting, he can make all these academic references and have them flow naturally into a popular speech is astonishing to me.
It's I mean, the guy really was, I know, like, we always like talk him up, but the guy really was like a true genius. And just like, when you read him or listen to his speeches, it's like, you're like kind of in awe. You're like, you're witnessing something special. That guy's mind was just on another level. But anyway, in the speech, he's talking at one point about how wonderful it is that communism has failed and that the Soviet Union collapsed. And one of the things he talks about, he gives he was saying that like a lot of people really started believing that like communism had created the new communist man and that they really didn't yearn for freedom anymore. And he cited this example where there was someone under Mao Zedong in China. It was like a family was like interviewed by some media outlet, and they asked like, what would you want? Would you want your kids to be happy, or would you want them to be loyal servants of the state? And they were like, loyal servants of the state. That's all we care about. Their happiness doesn't matter or something. And he was like, my God, this is so terrible. Like the commies have really brainwashed everybody into being. And then he said, he was talking to his friend who's like a China expert. And he was like, no, Murray. He goes, that's just what they say to the cameras. Because they know enough to know that, like, yeah, you say that to the cameras, and then when the cameras leave, you go tell the truth. And so, anyway, I guess there's some analogy there to almost like what we're living through right now, where you're like, oh, okay, this propaganda is so insane and it's so dumb. And you wonder, you're like, oh my God, have they just like ruined everybody? And then you see like, oh no, there's still people who are like yearning for something of substance. There's still people. This is part of the reason why these long form podcasts have blown up so much. It's like people don't just want the propaganda from Fox News or MSNBC. They want something more. There is still something of the ring of truth is still a powerful force. And, man, like if the commies couldn't squash that out of people, there's no way this American regime is ever going to be able to. And so, yeah, all those tactics, they don't work. At least they don't work like they used to, because people just see through how dumb it all. It's dumb and it's lies. And that can only go on for so long.
Dave, how do people find out? Because people listening to this should see you on the road. What your upcoming dates are?
Yeah, I'm on the road all year long. ComicDaveSmith.com has all the ticket links there. I'll be coming to a city near you at some point, I'm sure. And yeah, I'm up in Buffalo in a couple days. So I'm going. It was cold. At least I'm going somewhere where I expect it to be cold.
Yeah, I was thinking that. Right. At least you'll be prepared this time. All right. So yeah. So ComicDaveSmith.com is where to go. I think you might be coming to Tampa later in the year, but I think I'm not going to be around, so I had to see you in Houston, but I'm really glad I did. And it's just weird, getting emails from like real outlets and real, ticket brokers telling me, your show with Dave Smith is coming up. I'm thinking, what the heck is going on here? But anyway, congrats on the ongoing success. Everybody check out Part of the Problem, as I do. I'll say one quick thing. We were on the Tom Woods cruise, first one we've done. I'm going to be doing another one next year. So get on my email list at tomsfreebooks.com and you find out about that. But somebody asked, we were doing an Ask Me Anything, but it was Jenna, it was my wife. I'm Tom's wife, Ask Me Anything. And one of the questions was, what podcast does Tom listen to? And the one that she was absolutely certain about was Part of the Problem. So there you have it, folks. Dave, thanks so much.
Well, that warms my heart. Thank you so much, Tom. Always a pleasure.
And thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Make yourself and those you love less vulnerable to the regime, both mentally and physically. Get more forbidden information at tomsfreebooks.com and be sure to subscribe to the show wherever you listen. See you next time.
Like the sound of The Tom Woods Show? My audio production is provided by Podsworth Media. Check them out at podsworth.com.